Every Friday, my husband stayed late at work, but one day he forgot his phone, and a woman called, "Thank you for last night. Have you left yet?" I drove to the address. What I saw there turned my life upside down. Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had the kind of life people envied from the outside. A house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, the kind with a front porch and a maple tree that turned amber every October. 2 kids in middle school, a golden retriever named Biscuit, a husband who coached Little League on weekends and knew how to fix a leaky faucet. His name was Daniel. We had been married for 14 years. For most of those years, I genuinely believed we were happy. My name is Sarah. I was 39 years old when everything I thought I knew collapsed in the span of a single phone call. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. I just didn't want to. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It seeps in slowly, like water behind a wall, invisible until the whole structure gives way. It started the previous January. Daniel had always been a creature of habit. Home by 6:30, dinner with the family, 2 episodes of whatever we were watching together, lights out by 11. I liked that about him. Predictability felt like safety. Then, around late winter, the rhythm changed. Fridays specifically. He started staying late at work. End-of-week reports, he told me, restructuring meetings. I didn't question it at first. He was a mid-level manager at a logistics company downtown, and things like restructuring did happen. I made him a plate and kept it warm in the oven. But by March, I noticed other things, small things. He started showering immediately when he got home on Friday nights, something he never used to do. He became protective of his phone, placing it face down on the kitchen counter, taking it into the bathroom with him. He laughed differently at dinner sometimes, like his mind was somewhere else and the laugh was just a reflex. He started buying new clothes. Nothing dramatic, but nicer than usual. A gray Henley, dark jeans, a bottle of cologne I didn't recognize. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had a friend, Meg, who'd gone through a terrible divorce 2 years before, and I remembered thinking she'd been obsessive, checking receipts and phone bills. I didn't want to be that woman, so I pushed the thoughts down and focused on the kids and the house and my part-time job at the dental office, but the thoughts kept floating back up. One Thursday in April, I noticed he'd turned off location sharing on his phone. We'd set it up mutually years ago, after he'd gotten lost on a camping trip. When I mentioned it casually, he said it had been draining his battery. He said it with such ease that I almost believed him. Almost. That Friday, he left for work as usual. He kissed me on the cheek. He always kissed me on the cheek, which now strikes me as unbearably clinical, and said he'd probably be late again. I said okay. I fed the kids breakfast. I drove them to school. I came home and stood in the kitchen for a long moment looking at nothing, and then I saw it. His phone. On the counter, face down. He'd forgotten it. My first instinct was to get in the car and drive it to him. I actually picked up my keys, but I stopped. I don't know why exactly. Some animal part of me that had been watching and waiting finally made itself known. I set the keys back down. I stood there for maybe 3 minutes. Then the phone lit up. I turned it over. The screen showed a notification, a text message from a contact saved simply as K. "Thanks for last night. Already missing you. Have you left yet?" The kitchen went very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Biscuit clicked across the tile floor and pressed his nose against my leg. I read the message again and again. The words rearranged themselves into every possible shape, and every shape meant the same thing. I put the phone back down, face down, exactly as he'd left it. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I stood very still and felt something inside me, something that had been soft and trusting for 14 years, go completely, permanently cold. I called him on my own phone, told him he'd left his cell at home. He came back for it 20 minutes later, slightly flushed, slightly rushed. He said thanks. He kissed my cheek again. He left. I watched his car back out of the driveway. Was this the man I had built my entire adult life beside? Was this the same person who had held my hand in the delivery room twice, who had cried at our daughter's school play, who told me every anniversary that I was the best decision he'd ever made? I didn't have answers yet, but I had a question I could no longer ignore. And somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the numbness, a very quiet, very steady voice had already started making plans. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel came home at almost midnight, later than usual even for a Friday. I heard him come in through the garage, heard the familiar sounds, keys on the hook, shoes off at the door, water running in the kitchen. Normal sounds, sounds that had narrated my life for over a decade. Lying in the dark, I realized those sounds would never mean the same thing again. He slid into bed beside me, and I kept my breathing slow and even. He was asleep within minutes. I lay on my side of the mattress and stared at the ceiling and thought. The first thing I felt was fear. Not of him exactly, but of the math. We had a joint mortgage on a house worth $400,000 with 9 years left on the loan. We had 2 children, Emily, 12, and Jake, 10. We had shared savings, shared debt, shared health insurance through his employer. I worked part-time at Dr. Henley's dental office, 22 hours a week. My income covered groceries and the kids' extracurriculars, and not much else. If I blew this up tomorrow, if I screamed, if I confronted him, if I threw his things onto the front lawn like some kind of movie, what exactly would I be left with? I ran the numbers in my head the way I used to run homework problems in college, methodically, without emotion. I'd need a lawyer. Good family lawyers in Columbus cost $300 to $400 an hour. I had a savings account in my name only, a small one I'd kept since before we were married, about $11,000. Emergency money, I'd always called it. Well, this was an emergency. I also knew, and this was the part that made me grip the edge of the mattress, that if I confronted Daniel without proof, he would deny it. He was calm under pressure. He could explain away that text. Kay could be a colleague. Last night could be a work dinner. Already missing you could be reframed as something innocuous if he was clever enough. And Daniel was clever. In 14 years, I had never once won an argument with him outright. He had a lawyer's instinct for deflection even though he'd never studied law. So I couldn't be emotional. I had to be precise. By 3 a.m, I had made a decision. I would not confront him yet. I would watch, document, and prepare. I would build a case the way you build a house. Foundation first, then walls, then roof. Only when it was solid would I act. The next morning, I got up before him and made coffee. I moved through the kitchen like everything was normal because everything had to appear normal. Emily came down in her soccer jersey. Jake wanted pancakes. I made pancakes. Daniel appeared at 8:15 in his weekend clothes, jeans and that gray Henley, and poured himself a cup of coffee and said, "Morning." And I said, "Morning." And I handed him the mug and watched his hands close around it and thought, I am going to find out exactly who you are. That week, I started quietly. I opened my own browser on my personal laptop, not the family computer in the living room, and I researched. I learned about Ohio divorce law. I learned that Ohio is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state, meaning assets are divided fairly rather than automatically 50-50. I learned that fault, adultery, can be considered in property and alimony decisions, though judges vary. I learned the phrase dissipation of marital assets, which means money spent on an affair can be counted against a spouse in settlement negotiations. I wrote nothing down on paper. I kept my notes in a private document on my personal cloud account, password protected, under a folder I titled Book Club. If he ever looked, it would mean nothing. I also began to notice the financial picture more carefully. I asked Daniel casually whether his direct deposit was still going to the joint account. He said yes, of course. I pulled up our bank statements online, something I rarely did because he usually handled finances, and looked at the past 3 months. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize. Cash, smallish amounts, $200 here, $150 there, but consistent. Every week, and a charge I didn't know. A restaurant downtown called Alma, $48 in February, $92 in March. I had never been to Alma, neither had the children. I photographed the statements on my phone and uploaded them to Book Club. The following Friday, when he said he'd be late again, I told him I understood. I smiled. I sent him off. Then I got in my car. I had spent the previous 3 days going through his email. He'd been logged in on the family laptop and had never thought to log out, a mistake that told me something about how safe he felt. The emails between him and Kay were careful. No last names, no addresses. But in one exchange, she'd mentioned a street, a neighborhood, east side near the short north. I drove there. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. His car, maybe. Some kind of confirmation. And there it was. His gray Accord, parked on Hubbard Avenue in front of a brick apartment building. I sat across the street in my car for a long time. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I took 3 photos of his car and the building's address, and I drove home. My hands shook the entire way. But underneath the shaking, underneath the grief and the fury and the sick, hollow feeling in my chest, something else was forming, a kind of cold architectural clarity. What would happen next wouldn't be a scene. It wouldn't be tears on the doorstep. It would be a plan. The attorney's name was Patricia Nguyen. A colleague at the dental office, our front desk manager, Donna, had used her 2 years earlier and described her as the kind of woman who doesn't blink. I called the office on a Tuesday morning from the parking lot of a Kroger 3 miles from our house, using my cell phone with the volume low. I made an appointment for the following Thursday at noon. I told Dr. Henley I had a dental checkup of my own. He didn't question it. Patricia's office was in a clean, unremarkable building on North High Street, a potted fern in the waiting room, framed diplomas on the wall. She was 50-something Korean-American, with reading glasses pushed up into her short hair and the focused energy of someone who had heard every version of this story and still paid full attention to yours. I sat across from her and laid it out. 14 years of marriage, 2 children, the Fridays, the phone, the emails, the restaurant charges, the car on Hubbard Avenue. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You've done more preliminary work than most people who come to me. That helps." Then she told me what I needed to understand. Ohio allows divorce on grounds of adultery, but she advised me to file on incompatibility as well. It was harder to contest and moved faster. The adultery would matter most in negotiations, specifically around asset division and spousal support, not in the filing itself. She told me to keep gathering documentation, bank statements, photographs, the email screenshots. She told me not to move money, not to alert him, not to change any account passwords, or do anything that could be characterized as hostile asset behavior. The goal, she said, setting her pen down, is to be 3 steps ahead of him before he knows there's a game being played. I liked her immediately. She also warned me about something I hadn't considered, his reaction. Some men, she said carefully, when they realize what's happening, try to move assets, or they lawyer up fast and get aggressive. You need to be ready for that. She recommended I begin quietly documenting our shared assets, retirement accounts, the mortgage equity, his 401k. So we had a baseline. I had 30 days before our first formal step. I left her office and sat in my car in the parking garage for a few minutes. I wasn't crying. I was making a list in my head. Meanwhile, something had shifted at home. I didn't notice it immediately. I was too focused on my own quiet preparations. But looking back, I can pinpoint the moment Daniel began to feel something was wrong. It was a Wednesday night, about a week after my meeting with Patricia. We were cleaning up after dinner, and I asked him, very casually, about his pension, whether he'd updated his beneficiary designation recently. Just something I'd been thinking about, I said, given that the kids were getting older. He looked at me for just a moment too long. "Why are you asking about that?" he said. "I read an article," I said, and smiled and changed the subject. But I saw it, a flicker of something behind his eyes. Calculation. He was quiet for the rest of the evening. He must have said something to her, because 3 days later, the dynamic changed. He started coming home on time on Fridays. He put his phone on the kitchen counter openly, screen up. He suggested we go out for dinner as a family on Saturday, something we hadn't done in months. He was attentive, present, almost performatively normal. It might have worked on the version of me that existed 2 months ago. It told me that Kay was smart, that she was advising him to cover his tracks. Who was she? I still didn't have a full name, and I needed one. The answer came not from surveillance, but from his email, that same logged-in account on the family laptop, which he still hadn't thought to close. One evening, while he was bathing Jake, I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, ostensibly working on my grocery list, and I searched his inbox for the restaurant. Alma. One result came up, a reservation confirmation from OpenTable, sent to his work email, CC'd to a personal address I hadn't seen before. The CC address read KristenHollowayEggmail.com. I typed the name into Google, hand steady now, and the first result was a LinkedIn profile. Kristen Holloway, 31 years old, account manager at a marketing firm in the short north. Profile photo, dark hair, wide smile, pretty in an obvious way. She had worked at his company 2 years ago for 8 months. 8 months, long enough to become something. I screenshot everything. I uploaded it to Book Club. I closed the laptop and finished my grocery list. There it was, a full name, a face, a timeline. I thought about the version of Kristen Holloway who had smiled for that LinkedIn photo, professional, confident, building her career. And I wondered if she ever thought about the wife, about Emily and Jake, about what it meant to be the other person in this equation. Then I stopped wondering about her and started thinking about what came next, because I had what I needed now: a name, a paper trail, photographs, legal counsel, and 30 days of careful preparation. I thought about Patricia Nguyen's words, 3 steps ahead before he knows there's a game. I was 3 steps ahead, and it was time to move. I called Patricia on a Monday morning and told her I was ready. We filed that Wednesday. Irreconcilable differences, with adultery documented in my supporting affidavit. Patricia had already prepared the asset inventory. The house, both cars, the joint savings account, Daniel's 401k, my smaller IRA. She filed a motion for temporary orders. I would remain in the house with the children during proceedings. Standard, she said. Judges almost always granted it when minor children were involved. The process server reached Daniel at his office on Thursday at 2:14 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because Donna, who had a friend in Daniel's building as small worlds work, texted me a single word: done. I was standing in the dental office break room when I read it. I set my coffee cup down very carefully and took a slow breath. He called me 4 times between 2:15 and 3 p.m. I let every call go to voicemail. Patricia had advised me, all communication through counsel from this point forward. I texted him that single sentence: please contact my attorney. Her number is below. He came home that evening anyway. I had asked my neighbor, Carol, to take the kids for a few hours. I was sitting in the living room when his car pulled into the driveway. I had chosen my seat deliberately, upright in the armchair, not the couch. I wanted to be eye level with him. I wanted no softness in my posture. He walked in and his face was a color I had never seen on him before. Not just angry, humiliated, exposed. What the hell is this? He held up the papers and his hand was shaking. You've been served, I said. Patricia Nguyen is my attorney. All further communication. Sarah. His voice cracked on my name, and for a second, just a second, something in me wanted to soften. 14 years of reflex. I breathed through it. This is insane. You can't do this. Not over what? I said quietly. Over Kristen Holloway? The room went very still. He stared at me. I watched him calculate. I could practically see him doing it, whether to deny, to minimize, to reframe. Then the calculation shifted into something harder. You don't know what you're doing, he said. You think you're going to take this house? My money? You work part-time. You'll be drowning in legal fees before this is over. Maybe, I said, but I have documentation going back 4 months, bank withdrawals, emails, photographs of your car on Hubbard Avenue every Friday. I have a very clear picture of where marital funds went. He left the room, but that wasn't the end of it. That was only the beginning of the escalation. 2 days later, Kristen Holloway called my cell phone. I don't know how she got the number. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. And I sat in my car in the driveway and played it twice with my hands in my lap. Her voice was composed, but the composure was thin. She said she was calling to tell me I was making a mistake, that Daniel and she were in love, that if I pursued the divorce aggressively, Daniel would fight for full custody, and I should think carefully about what a custody battle would do to my children. The word sent a white-hot flash through my chest. I forwarded the voicemail to Patricia without responding. Patricia called me back within an hour. This is actually helpful, she said. Unsolicited contact from the third party, explicit custody threat. We can use this. She sent a formal cease and desist letter to Kristen Holloway the following morning. She also filed the voicemail as an exhibit. 3 days later, Daniel, through his attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh, a known bulldog in local family court, sent a counterfiling that disputed the asset inventory and requested a vocational evaluation of me, essentially arguing that because I was capable of working full-time, I should receive no spousal support. It was aggressive. It was meant to exhaust me financially and emotionally. I sat with Patricia in her office and listened and felt the fear move through me like a cold wave and then recede. Because I had expected this. We had planned for this. He's playing from the standard playbook, Patricia said calmly. We play ours. I drove home that afternoon and picked up Emily and Jake from school and took them for ice cream and listened to Jake tell me about a prank his friend had played at lunch and Emily complain about her history essay, and I laughed in the right places and felt, underneath it all, something that was almost peace. That weekend, I let myself rest. I called my sister in Portland, Rebecca, 4 years older, the one who'd always been the practical one, and I told her everything. She listened for 40 minutes. Then she said, "You should have called me sooner." She said she was proud of me. I hadn't known how much I needed those words until they arrived. I slept 8 hours Friday night, the first real sleep in weeks. I wasn't finished, not even close. But I had moved from fear into motion, and motion, I was learning, was its own kind of survival. The offer came on a Tuesday. Gerald Marsh, Daniel's attorney, sent Patricia a settlement proposal. It arrived as a formal document, 7 pages, and Patricia read it to me over the phone in the even tone she used for everything, which I had come to find deeply reassuring. The terms: Daniel would keep the house. I would receive a cash payout of $60,000, roughly 15% of the equity, and child support calculated at minimum state guidelines. No spousal support. We would share legal custody, with the children primarily with me. He would keep his 401k in full. I would keep my IRA. He's offering you less than a quarter of what you're likely entitled to, Patricia said. This is an opening bid. They want you to panic and take it. I'm not panicking, I said. I know, she said. That's why we're going to decline it formally and counter at full equitable distribution. But the settlement wasn't the only approach they tried that week. Daniel called me, not through counsel, which Patricia noted was technically improper, on a Wednesday evening while the kids were upstairs doing homework. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, document everything. I answered and set the phone on the counter, speaker on, my own phone beside it recording the call. His voice was different this time, softer, careful. He said he was sorry. He said he knew he'd made mistakes. He used that word, mistakes, like he'd miscalculated a tip at a restaurant, and that he still cared about our family. He said he didn't want the kids to go through a war. He said if we could just talk, just the two of us, he thought we could work something out quietly without all the lawyers. He said, "You know me, Sarah. You know I would never try to hurt you." I let him finish. Then I said very calmly, "All communication should go through Patricia Nguyen. You have her number." And I ended the call. I sent the recording to Patricia. She called me back 15 minutes later. He just handed us evidence of him attempting to negotiate directly with a represented party. Gerald is going to have a very unpleasant conversation with his client. She sounded for the first time faintly amused. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Biscuit came and sat beside me, leaning against my leg. I scratched behind his ears and looked out the window at the backyard. The swing set we'd put up when Jake was 4, the raised garden beds I'd built the summer before, the maple tree at the edge of the yard. I had planted things in this ground. I had built things in this house. And I was going to walk out of it with everything I was owed, not a penny less. But I also knew I couldn't sustain myself on legal strategy alone. Anger was useful fuel, but it burned hot and it burned fast. I needed something steadier. I had already called Rebecca, my sister in Portland, and told her everything. She'd offered to fly out, and I'd said not yet, let me get my footing. But she called every 2 days now, and those calls were a kind of anchor. I also, that week, made an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Dr. Anita Bose, and she worked out of a small office in Clintonville, a neighborhood I'd always liked for its wide sidewalks and old bungalows. She was warm without being saccharine, and in our first session, she said something that stayed with me. The hardest part of what you're going through isn't the betrayal itself. It's grieving a version of your life you thought was real. I sat with that for a long time. I also found, somewhat accidentally, a support group. Donna at the office mentioned it. A weekly gathering at a community center. Women going through divorce or separation. I went once, skeptically, expecting misery stacked on misery. Instead, I found a woman named Gloria who had left a marriage after 22 years and now ran a small catering business and laughed loudly and often, and a younger woman, Teresa, who was 2 years past her divorce and talked about it the way you talk about a surgery. Painful, necessary, over. The worst part, Teresa told me one evening over terrible coffee, was thinking I wasn't strong enough, and then finding out I was, and then being mad that I'd wasted all that time underestimating myself. I drove home from that meeting with the windows down even though it was only 60 degrees. Were Daniel and Kristen watching all of this? Maybe. I knew through Patricia that Gerald Marsh had hired a paralegal to monitor my social media. Standard tactic, looking for evidence of income or a new relationship or anything that could be used. I had already locked down every account. I posted nothing. Let them watch. I had nothing to hide. What I had, instead, was a therapist and a lawyer and a sister who called every 2 days and a group of women who had already survived what I was in the middle of. I had documentation. I had a strategy. And I had, slowly, something I hadn't felt in months, the steady, quiet certainty that I was going to be all right. They came on a Saturday morning. I know, looking back, that I should have been more prepared for it. But even after everything, some part of me didn't think they would come together. Daniel and Kristen at my door at 10 in the morning while the kids were at Rebecca's. She'd flown in from Portland 2 days earlier, without me asking, and taken Emily and Jake to the Science Museum. I saw them through the sidelight window before I opened the door. Kristen standing half a step behind Daniel, her hands folded in front of her, dressed in a way that was clearly deliberate, understated, professional, no threat. Daniel in a collared shirt, no tie, both of them presenting a performance of reasonableness. I considered not answering. Then I thought, this is my house. Not yet legally settled, but mine in every way that mattered today. I opened the door. "We want to talk," Daniel said. 5 minutes, that's all. "Everything goes through Patricia," I said. "Sarah." He said my name the way he always did when he wanted to signal that I was being difficult. "We're not here as adversaries. We just want to have a human conversation." I looked at Kristen. She met my eyes and offered a small, careful smile. The kind that says, "I am not your enemy," while the subtext says, "but I could be." I stepped back and let them in. Not out of weakness. I wanted to hear what they had come to say. I also had my phone in my cardigan pocket, recording. We stood in the living room. I didn't offer seats, and Daniel began. He said the legal process was becoming destructive. He said it was costing both of us money that should go to the children's futures. He said that if I would agree to a modified settlement, he named a figure slightly higher than the original offer, still far below what Patricia was pursuing, he would drop the vocational evaluation request and agree to generous visitation terms. He said, "I know this hasn't been fair to you. I'm acknowledging that. But I need you to meet me halfway." Then Kristen spoke. She said, and her voice was steady, practiced, that she understood this was painful and that she had respect for what I'd built with Daniel over the years. She said that she and Daniel were going to be together regardless of how the legal proceedings went, and that the only question was whether we could all move forward in a way that protected the children. She used the word we, she and I, as if we were allies. Then she said, "Emily and Jake are going to have a relationship with me whether you want that or not. It would be better for them if that relationship started in a spirit of goodwill." There it was. Not a threat exactly, not something Patricia could quote directly, but the meaning was clear. Accept our terms, or we make the children a battlefield. I looked at her for a long moment. She held my gaze, still wearing that careful smile. "Are you finished?" I said. They both looked at me. "I've heard your offer," I said. "I've noted your position. My attorney will be in contact." I walked to the front door and opened it. "You should go now." Daniel's composure broke first. "You're going to regret this," he said, and his voice had a new edge, something raw and ugly under the polished surface. "Gerald is going to make this very expensive for you. You think you have enough to fight this? You work part-time at a dentist office." "Goodbye, Daniel," I said. Kristen touched his arm, the practiced composure back in place on her face, though her eyes were cold. She guided him toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back to me. "We only wanted to give you a chance," she said. "I know," I said pleasantly, and I declined it. "Have a nice day." I closed the door. I stood with my back against it and my heart hammering in my chest, loud enough that I could feel it in my throat. For a full minute, I just breathed. The fear was real. I won't pretend it wasn't. The phrase "make this very expensive" landed somewhere vulnerable, because it was true that money was finite and legal battles were long. But underneath the fear, something else rose, something harder. They had come to my house. They had stood in my living room, the room where I had read to my children 1,000 bedtime stories, where Daniel and I had assembled a Christmas tree every year for a decade, and they had tried to use my children as leverage. I pulled out my phone. The recording was still running. I stopped it, saved it, labeled it, and emailed it to Patricia with a subject line that read, "Saturday morning. You'll want to hear this." Then I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and called Rebecca. "They came," I said when she picked up. A pause. "Together?" "Together." Another pause. "Oh, they're scared," Rebecca said. "People don't overplay their hand like that unless they're scared." I thought about that. I held it up to the light and turned it over. She was right. Good. The hearing was set for a Thursday in October. Cuyahoga. No, Franklin County Domestic Court. 3rd floor, Judge Eleanor Marsh. A different Marsh than Gerald, no relation, which Patricia had quietly confirmed with a note of satisfaction. Judge Marsh had a reputation for precision and a low tolerance for courtroom theater. I wore a navy blazer and low heels and arrived 20 minutes early. Rebecca sat in the gallery. She had extended her stay in Columbus with no discussion, just quietly rearranged her life to be there. And when I looked back at her before taking my seat, she gave me one short nod. Daniel and Gerald arrived 4 minutes before the hour. Daniel wore a dark suit. He looked like he had slept poorly. Kristen was not present. She was not a party to the proceedings, but I knew she was somewhere, waiting. Patricia had prepared for this hearing the way a surgeon prepares for a complex procedure. No wasted movements, no improvisation. She'd organized the evidence into a formal exhibit binder, 47 pages of bank records, email screenshots, the open table confirmation, the Hubbard Avenue photographs, the voicemail from Kristen, the recording from my living room. Gerald opened by reiterating the vocational evaluation argument, that I was capable of full-time employment and therefore spousal support was unwarranted. He was smooth, practiced. He made it sound like basic arithmetic. Patricia let him finish. Then she presented the financial dissipation evidence. The cash withdrawals over 14 months, documented and totaled, came to just over $22,000. Patricia laid out in clean sequential order the correlation between those withdrawals and Daniel's Friday evenings, the Alma restaurant charges, a hotel booking in March, 2 nights downtown Columbus charged to a credit card I hadn't known existed, a card opened in his name alone 18 months ago with a $12,000 balance. Gerald objected to the credit card records. Patricia had obtained them legally via formal financial disclosure request filed 30 days prior. Gerald's objection died quietly. Daniel sat at the table and I watched him. He was still, very still, which was how I knew he was frightened. Daniel went still when he was frightened. I had always known that about him and had somehow never found it useful until now. Then Patricia played the recording from my living room. The courtroom was quiet as Kristen's voice filled the room, measured, professional, saying that Emily and Jake were going to have a relationship with her regardless, saying it would be better if it started in a spirit of goodwill. Judge Marsh listened with no expression. When the recording ended, she looked at Gerald. Was your client aware that this conversation was taking place at the marital residence? She said. Your Honor, the admissibility of... I'm not ruling on admissibility yet. I'm asking a question. Gerald said yes. Daniel had been aware. And the woman speaking, Judge Marsh said, that is the individual named in the adultery affidavit? That is correct, Patricia said. I sat with my hands folded on the table and looked at the middle distance and felt nothing that could be described as satisfaction, only a clean, uncluttered clarity, like a room after everything unnecessary had been removed. Gerald called Daniel to speak, and this was where it came apart. Daniel had prepared a statement. He'd clearly rehearsed it. It was measured, appropriately contrite, about a relationship outside the marriage, while pivoting immediately to questions about my ability to support myself and the children. But then Patricia began her cross. She asked about the credit card. He said he'd opened it for travel expenses. She asked about the hotel in March. He said it was a work conference. She presented the hotel's conference calendar for that weekend. There had been no conference. The hotel was a boutique property with 12 rooms, not a conference venue. He said he might be misremembering. Patricia moved on. She asked about the Friday evenings. He said they were work meetings. She presented the email chain, recovered from the family laptop, legally obtained from a shared device, in which he and Kristen discussed specific Friday plans. The emails were time-stamped. They overlapped exactly with his claimed work hours. Mr. Calloway, Patricia said, and I felt something in my chest at the sound of his last name spoken that way, like a label on a case file. How many of these Fridays involved work? He was quiet for a moment. Some of them. Can you identify which ones? He could not. Judge Marsh made a note. He tried, once, to redirect. He said I had been emotionally distant for years. He said the marriage had been struggling long before Kristen. His voice gained an edge. The edge I'd heard in my living room when he said Gerald is going to make this very expensive. And Gerald visibly tensed. Patricia waited until he finished. Then she said, So your position is that the marriage had difficulties. Does that position explain the hidden credit card? Gerald intervened. Daniel sat back. Judge Marsh looked over her glasses at the table. I've seen the financials, and I've heard the recordings, she said, in a tone that was not unkind but contained no ambiguity. I want both parties to understand where this hearing is going. Mr. Calloway, I'd strongly advise a conversation with your counsel about the realistic parameters of settlement. It wasn't a ruling, but it was a verdict. I looked at Daniel. For just a moment, our eyes met. He looked away first. I thought of the kitchen that April morning, his phone on the counter, face down, the refrigerator humming, biscuit pressing against my leg. Thanks for last night. And I thought, this is where that moment led, right here. Gerald Marsh called Patricia the following Monday morning. He wanted to discuss settlement. Patricia relayed this to me in her office that afternoon, with that particular economy of expression that told me what she thought without her saying it. They were folding. The question was whether they would fold cleanly or try to negotiate the corners. "He's going to start higher than what we want," she said. "We stay at our number." Judge Marsh's comments Thursday were not subtle. Gerald knows what a ruling looks like when it's already been decided. Our number was everything we were entitled to under Ohio equitable distribution, calculated precisely. 50% of the marital home equity, 50% of Daniel's 401k accrued during the marriage, spousal support for 5 years at a rate commensurate with the income gap between us, child support at state guidelines, and primary physical custody of Emily and Jake, with Daniel receiving standard visitation. Every other weekend, alternating holidays. The house was mine. Negotiations took 11 days. Patricia reported each session to me by phone, her tone unchanged whether the session had gone well or poorly, a quality I had come to trust completely. Gerald pushed back on the spousal support duration. Patricia held. Gerald proposed a reduced 401k split. Patricia held. Gerald raised the custody schedule, asking for more overnights. Patricia pointed out that his client had not attended a single school conference or medical appointment in the past 3 years, documented, and that the record did not support expanded parental time. Gerald held. Then, on the 11th day, he didn't. I was at the dental office when Patricia called. I stepped into the back hallway and pressed the phone to my ear. "He's accepted the terms," she said. "All of them. Full equitable distribution, primary custody to you, 5 years of spousal support at the agreed rate. He vacates the house by December 1st. I stood in the hallway with the phone against my ear and the fluorescent light buzzing above me, and I said, "Every term." "Every term," Patricia said. "No modifications. He signed the agreement document this morning." I thanked her. I went back to the front desk and finished my shift. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a long moment. My driveway in front of my house, with the maple tree standing orange and red in the October afternoon. And I let myself feel it. All of it. The grief that was still there, quieter now, and the exhaustion and the unmistakable, complicated feeling of having fought something enormous and not been broken by it. The signing took place at Patricia's office on a Friday afternoon. Daniel sat across the table with Gerald beside him. He was pale. He didn't look at me. I looked at him. Clearly, steadily, without anger and without softness. I wanted him to understand that I saw him. Not the version he performed for the world, not the coached presentation Gerald had constructed, but him, and that I had always seen more than he thought I did. He signed. I signed. Patricia notarized. Gerald gathered his papers with practiced neutrality and left quickly. Outside Patricia's office, I stood on North High Street in my navy blazer in the late October air and called Rebecca. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for a long moment. "All of it?" "All of it." She made a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a laugh and a cry, and said, "Come home. Cook something. I made your guest room up this morning. I've been waiting." I drove to her rental apartment. She met me at the door and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. Then she poured wine and we sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything. Not the legal summary, which she knew, but the feeling of it. What it had been like to sit in that courtroom and watch 14 years of performance collapse under the weight of evidence. To watch Daniel search for an exit that wasn't there. The children didn't know the details. They knew their parents were divorcing, that it was not their fault, that both of us loved them completely. Emily had cried. Jake had asked with devastating practicality if he could still have the same bedroom. I had promised him yes. Daniel moved out on November 29th, 2 days ahead of schedule. I stood in the doorway and watched the moving truck pull away. Biscuit sat beside me. The maple tree was bare now, its leaves gone, but the branches held their shape against the gray November sky. The same branches they'd always been, just more visible. And Kristen Holloway? She was not part of the settlement legally. She had no standing in the proceedings. But her voicemail was entered into court record. Her name appeared in the adultery affidavit, which was public record. Her LinkedIn profile received in the weeks following a quiet but notable reduction in connections. She and Daniel were still together when the ink dried. I didn't think about them often. When I did, it was briefly and without heat. I had the house. I had my children. I had Patricia Nguyyen's final invoice, which I paid in full, and a letter she sent with it that said, in her characteristic understatement, "You are a good client. I hope you won't need me again." I put the letter in a drawer. I made dinner. I helped Jake with his science project. I watched Emily fall asleep on the couch reading a novel, and I covered her with a blanket and stood there for a moment in the quiet house that was mine. I had fought for it. I had won it. That was enough. 2 years later, I went back to school. Not dramatically. Not in a movie montage way, not as a grand gesture. Just practically. I enrolled in a dental hygiene program at Columbus State, 2 evenings a week, because Dr. Henley had mentioned twice that his hygienist was retiring in 18 months, and I had finally allowed myself to believe that my life was still capable of expansion. I graduated in March. Dr. Henley hired me into the full-time position. The salary was 3 times what I'd been making at the front desk. I bought a used car, a sensible one, a Subaru, silver, entirely in my own name, with my own credit, which I had spent those 2 years carefully building. The first time I drove it off the lot, I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes listening to the radio before I realized I was smiling without knowing why. The spousal support arrived on the 1st of every month. I put it into a separate account and tried to live on my salary alone. It was tight. Some months. It was also entirely mine. Emily was 14. She had taken up photography, real photography with a film camera, and had a teacher who told me at conferences that she had unusual compositional instinct for her age. Jake was 12 and had decided he wanted to be an engineer, largely because of a YouTube channel about bridges. He built one out of popsicle sticks and epoxy that held 12 pounds. We tested it together at the kitchen table, and when it held, he pumped his fist and I photographed it. Those evenings, ordinary, textured, full of the specific small comedies of 2 kids growing up, were the heart of my life. I had been afraid, somewhere in the worst of it, that the children would be damaged by the upheaval. Children are resilient in ways that shame the adults around them. They saw their father every other weekend. Those visits returned them slightly subdued at first, then gradually more neutral, normal, as these things eventually normalize. And Daniel? I know what happened because Columbus is a city that functions, in many neighborhoods, like a small town. Donna heard things. Gloria from the support group had a friend who knew people. Daniel and Kristen lasted 14 months after the divorce was finalized. It ended not with drama, but with erosion. Kristen had imagined a different version of Daniel than the one who existed in everyday life, the one who forgot to replace the toilet paper roll and went quiet for days when stressed and needed someone to manage his emotional calendar the way I had done, without ever being thanked for it. The apartment they'd shared in the short north was expensive. The relationship had existed in the compressed, exciting space of secrecy. Ordinary life expanded it, and what expanded was the friction. She moved out in February. I know this because his support payments were late that month twice, and Patricia sent a brief, pointed letter. They regularized immediately. Daniel rented a smaller apartment alone. From Emily, who reported these things with the careful neutrality of a child navigating two worlds, I understood that he had furnished it sparsely and that the coffee maker was broken for 6 weeks before he replaced it. I was not happy because they were struggling. That would require me to stay connected to them, to let them continue to occupy real estate in my inner life. I was happy for entirely different reasons. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I grew tomatoes in the raised beds. Biscuit turned 9 and slowed down and required more patience on walks, which I was glad to give. Gloria became a real friend. We had dinner together once a month at an Italian place in Clintonville, and she made me laugh in a helpless, undignified way that I had forgotten was possible. I went on one date in the second year set up by Donna. He was a quiet, kind man named Robert who taught high school history and had kind eyes. We had dinner twice and then both concluded amiably that the timing wasn't right. It felt unexpectedly like evidence that I was capable of navigating these things without catastrophe. Dr. Anita Bose and I had reduced our sessions to once a month. In one of them, she said, "You came in here afraid that you couldn't survive this. What do you think now?" I looked at the fern on her windowsill. I thought about the kitchen table where Jake's bridge had held 12 pounds, the October afternoon in my driveway, the maple tree. "I think I survived it," I said, "and I think I'm going to be okay with what comes next." She wrote something in her notebook. Then she said, "That's the answer. If you were in that kitchen, holding that phone, looking at those words, what would you have done? Leave your answer below, and if this story stayed with you, subscribe. Thank you for being here."